Welcome. This is our first Liberty Salon in our new location, downtown Aspen, 625 Hyman Avenue. We're here to talk about law enforcement and the legacy of Hunter Thompson's campaign for sheriff in 1970. And I'm here with a couple amazing people. Bob Braudis, former sheriff, 24 years, 6 terms. We've got current Sheriff Joe DiSalvo. And the reason, for the first Liberty Salon, we wanted to have these two gentlemen come and talk is because there's a really strong legacy that, although Hunter didn't win, over time, Dick Keenest, who he originally wanted to be his undersheriff, and then later Bob and Joey, sort of carried on his legacy. And there's a quote at the beginning of the new book, Freak Power, which we're releasing tonight, and we've got copies here. The first quote in the book says, "We cannot expect people to have respect for law and order until we teach respect to those we have entrusted to enforce those laws." And that's something that Hunter said that I think is really prescient. You have to respect the people that you entrust to enforce the laws. And these two gentlemen have more respect from me than pretty much anybody I've ever met. They're the most amazing people, and it's been a real pleasure getting to know them. It's actually been one of the greatest pleasures of my life to get to know these two men, and thank you for coming and talking about these things. And I'm going to hand it off now and to Bob.
Can you hear me? No. I don't know if this even works.
That doesn't amplify.
It doesn't do anything? It's just for looks?
No, you've got one on.
All right, I want to... In 1970, there was a guy painting my door. His name was Michael Solheim. He was with the Straight Line Painting Company. He told me he was opening a bar at the Hotel Jerome. So I started going in there. I went in there the day he opened it. And over the next few months, I met Hunter Thompson. And I signed up to be a foot soldier on his campaign. There were some guys that had worked on campaigns back east. One guy had worked for the Rockefeller campaign. They knew a lot more about it than we did, most of us. But we were basically trying to register long hairs, freaks, for the upcoming November election.
I'm sorry, Bob. People here that you can't see or hear. But you don't want to stand up, I bet.
No.
I can stand up.
No, you're fine.
I got a titanium femur and a cobalt hip.
Don't worry about it.
All right.
You can also see the full version on Grassroots TV. It's going to be aired over the next few weeks.
Or you can come up closer.
Come up closer. Come along the side.
Get cozy.
Sit down, Bob.
No, I can stand. So anyway, the campaign was slowly gaining some momentum among the newly arrived ski bums, hippies, freaks, and it was my first real interest in politics where I did anything other than protest. I got here from protesting a lot of things, especially the war in Vietnam. DJ wrote a book on Tom Benton. He's the artist and activist who did all of our political campaign posters in the last 40 years. Tom Benton was brought back to life by DJ's book and his opening of the first Gonzo Gallery. I met DJ while he was working on that book, and shortly thereafter he announced that he was going to do a book on Hunter's campaign in 1970. And over the last 2.5 years, using his education in history and in art, he put together a masterpiece that I think is singular in my life of literary exposures. This book capsulizes through art, prose, and memorabilia from 1970 He took me back to 1970. He never met Hunter, but he knows more about Hunter's political philosophy than most people, especially us old croakers. So this book is an incredible testament to what I would call the balls of Hunter S. Thompson. He had a lot of grit, a lot of sand, and even though he lost, he paved the way for Michael Kinsley, Joe Edwards, Dwight Shellman, a whole litany of Aspen and Pitkin County elected officials who also shared in the grit and the courage to make change. And we made a lot of changes, and most of them stuck. The downzoning, the restrictive land use policies, and in my world, the humanitarian law enforcement. So as freaky as Hunter was, as big of a one-time loser as he was, I give him credit for setting the stage for a lot of environmental protection, human protection, and law enforcement. And as DJ alluded to, Dick Keenest was the first progressive sheriff here. He hired me as a deputy in 1977. He took a huge risk hiring me. I was anti-authoritarian. I was actively using illegal substances, but he gave me a gun and a badge. He gave me a gun and a badge.
And you know what? He did the same thing. 10 years later, he did the same thing to me.
Take over.
After doing the whole
I'm
thing.
going to sit down.
So that's how we got here tonight, and I do agree with Bob. I think DJ has been an unbelievable navigator of this story and bringing it back to life, and really is going to be the curator of not only this work but this memory for a long time. And Bob's right; he does know more about this legacy than just about anybody. And I need to say thank you for that. I'd like to get this going. I mean, we've talked about what this is going to look like. I think this should be real interactive with you guys. We talked about some key topics like policing and activism and some other stuff. But you know, what I'm most curious about when I read this book, it kind of made me think of the full circle that started in 1970 when this town was basically, although I was only 10 years old at the time, this town, from all accounts, was a conservative environment, especially when it came to law enforcement. And then a bunch of freaks and hippies started to come to town for their own reasons. And Hunter made a real run at opposing the norm, the establishment. And I think that is almost come full circle. Although, as Bob said, he didn't do it right away. Eventually, it happened. And it happened through Dick Keenest and Bob. And I think it's amazing that today, policing needs a real overhaul. I mean, we got some people that are making decisions on our behalf that frankly are frightening. We have, in 1970, we had hippies getting rousted over long hair, and in 2014 and 15, we've got a guy getting choked in a New York City street over a penny cigarette. So are we over policing, I guess, is a question that we could start talking about tonight is, you know, are we over policing? Is there race involved in law enforcement now?
And there's one quote that I think is interesting from the campaign. You know, a lot of this material, you can just change the date on it. But one of the things Hunter wanted to do was take guns away from cops. He said, you know, every race riot is caused by a trigger-happy cop shooting some innocent person. And when I was putting all this together, I thought it was really interesting how prescient a lot of these ideas were and how relevant they were today.
Yeah, we can analogize the discrimination against ski bum long hair hippies in 1969 and discrimination against blacks from 1769 to present day. In the 40 years I've been involved in public safety, the biggest changes came during the war on drugs. When Nixon launched the war on drugs, slowly but surely our police departments, our sheriff's departments, our state troopers all over the country became militarized. And they were assisted by the federal government. As we pulled out of Vietnam, as we pulled out of every country we invaded, even Grenada, we gave all this junk that was left over to local police departments. I know Joey and I have never applied for a federal grant for a tank or a Humvee.
It's not that funny. You could get them through a website.
But then Clinton in the 80s, through what was a vain attempt at reforming criminal justice, started instituting what's called minimum mandatories, which handcuffed the judges. If you were convicted or pled guilty to certain classes of drug crimes, you were looking at 20 years, life. It's insane. Now, as we invaded all those countries I mentioned earlier, one thing we didn't count on was the cost and the misery of bringing back the veterans and caring for them for the rest of their lives. Guys with no legs, no arms, no vision. There has been that collateral effect in the war on drugs and the attempt to reform the criminal justice system. It is now famously embarrassing that we have more people in cages than any country in the world. The incarceration rate in my home state, Massachusetts, went up 250% in the 20 years following the reform attempt. Louisiana, which has more people incarcerated per capita than any state in the country, went up 350%. It has to end. Virtually nobody dies in prison. Someday they open the gate, it swings open, and the guy that's been in a cage for 20, 30 or more years, relating to people who have developed all their animalistic skills, are released upon our society. They're given $200 and a good luck. They get out, they have to pay $65 a week to their parole officer. They don't get their driver's license back. Are we helping them? The thing that I'm bringing up is we've got to start opening the cages for nonviolent elderly drug offenders. It is something that...
I got a quote here.
DJ has a quote.
And this is something Hunter Thompson said during the campaign. And us being in Colorado, we're definitely lucky, but around the country, drug laws are still, have a high cost. And this is a quote Hunter said during the campaign at one of the debates. Marijuana laws are one of the reasons that there's this lack of respect that cops complain about all over the country. When you get a whole generation who grow up as felons, and they know the law is ridiculous, and they're told all this gibberish about it, that it drives you crazy, it makes your brain soft, and your feet fall off. Even the police know it's a silly law. It's time that we either bridge that chasm with some kind of realistic law enforcement, or I don't think it's going to be bridged in this country. So, and the only point that I was going to say about that is, Hunter's ideas about treating drug abuse and drug issues as a health problem or a mental health problem, as opposed to an incarceration problem. That is something that, I think law enforcement around the country should really start to embrace.
And right now in the Pitkin County Jail, which is a few blocks from here, we have maybe 15 inmates. 25% of them are either mentally ill, and more than that of them are there on a drug-related offense, meaning that they probably were under the influence when they committed a crime. And this is what we're stacking up the jails with, not people that could really hurt you. It's just people we don't know what else to do with them. Mentally ill especially are ending up incarcerated in our own jail because we have no place else to put them. In bigger jails, in city streets, we got cops popping people for many years, since the 60s and 70s, on low-level offenses, just to get them in jail and virtually clean up the streets. That's really not a good way to use enforcement of laws, is to storehouse them in jails just because we don't know what else to do with people. We could cut, Bob's right, we could cut down a shitload of money that we're spending on jails, even in this valley, if we let the nonviolent drug offenders, white-collar people, whatever, out. The people who have not harmed anybody.
And I want to do a quick little plug. We're going to continue this Liberty Salon series over time, and next weekend we're having some events Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we're lucky enough to have Jerry Goldstein here Friday night. Jerry's done a lot of the courageous work that we're talking about, going around and trying to get people out of prison, and finding these inmates in Texas that are in jail for 20 years for a joint, and the pioneering work he's done for NORML has been remarkable, and so he's going to talk about that on Friday night, as well as Lauren Jenkins, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. He's going to talk about his experiences with the Vietnam War and Hunter Thompson. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, if you look at the history of salons, they go back 400 years in Europe, and they were without hierarchy. The royals had their court where the knights and the counts and the dukes.
Sheriffs.
The what?
The sheriffs.
The reeves of the shire, Jerry. The reeves of the shire back then. But, they migrated to America from Paris, and like I said, it was without hierarchy. This group is a little too big to have a lot of cross-talking. I guess in the perfect model, it'd be 20 or 30 people under one roof talking, philosophers, artists, poets, etc. So this is our attempt to at least start some cross-talking. And what we've been talking about with the people who built this gallery and put together this exhibit is that the young people are getting frustrated. We're talking revolution. In our day, the revolution would be political in America, but throughout history, when's the last successful revolution you can remember? Was it the Bolshevik Revolution? Was it the peaceful revolution in India? I think the distribution of wealth in this country and throughout most of the Western world is precarious. I think the have-nots started most of those revolutions because the haves didn't give them enough. Most revolutions, including ours, were started by farmers and tradesmen, carpenters, and merchants, not the guys in the white wigs that we all have on our money, but it was people who were fed up. And I get the feeling that the disenfranchised people that Joey and DJ alluded to, the mentally ill and the incarcerated, no one's fighting for them, but as I said, they're all going to be released someday. When I was trying to raise money for the mentally ill, I was competing against the Music Associates and various other arts groups, and it was real hard to get a few bucks for the confused. But try raising money for a guy that's doing 20 years for cocaine. It's pretty hard.
You know what the best thing about this is? He could say everything I'm thinking that's not politically correct. And it doesn't have to, and it won't be attributed to me tomorrow, will it, Lauren? So let's just say we agree.
Be yourself.
Does anybody in the audience have a topic we want to talk about? Or
okay.
Michael Kinsley, we have to start with a guy who's a big part of this.
Kinsley.
So clearly, when we look at some of the horrible events that have happened around the country the last few years, and frankly, for a couple of centuries, cops shooting people of color, we can suggest that at least a few of those are dangerous thugs.
Repeat the question.
But I think it's also reasonable to guess that some of them are scared guys out in the streets trying to survive. So you guys operated and operate in a pretty benign public safety environment. If instead one of you guys was tomorrow made the chief of police of whatever, Chicago, LA, or whatever, what would you do differently with your guys on the street to change the environment?
Whether it's Ferguson,
Let's repeat the question.
I'm sorry.
You can start on that one.
Just repeat the question. You guys repeat the question.
The question is, what would I do to overhaul New York or Ferguson or anything else? Is that it in a nutshell, Michael? Yep. I think all those agencies, and I'm going to pick on my home state. I'm going to pick on New York City. After I saw that Eric Gardner strangling, I knew what happened. Most of those cops who go into New York City, work every day, drive over a bridge that leads to New Jersey, where their $125,000 a year salary gets them a nice setup in a white neighborhood. And so every night they commute at 7 p.m. across that bridge into one of the worst neighborhoods in the world. They can't relate to the people that are in there. Same with Ferguson. I think they had 3 or 4 cops on that whole police force. One of the things that started with, as far as I'm concerned, in this department was a key thing that we did, that Dick did, is hire local. All of those cities, they should have people from the areas in which they live policing the people. The first quote DJ said basically is, the people need to respect the people they work for, more or less. I don't see how you could import somebody, let's say this community, from Grand Junction to work here every day, 90 minutes each direction, expect him to get a real hold on this community that has a real unique political environment, a real unique cultural environment and mindset. So I think you got to hire local. And when I talk local, I mean hood rats. Maybe, Bob has said before, and I'll let him continue, but go to the projects, and from each. Oh, there he is. So Anthony, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? Tell us about your.
What Joe's saying is right. I was born here in '76. I spent most of my life in Aspen. Like a lot of kids here, we kind of have to leave to appreciate it. You see a taste of the real world, and then you realize that where you came from was actually a pretty cool, special place. So, but there's kind of a double side to that coin, where it's great for the sheriff to be able to hire somebody local. Thank you. It's also great for someone like me who did grow up here to have the respect of my peers that are proud of me because I did become a deputy, because we tend to have a pretty good reputation within the community. And I think it comes from being able to listen to the people that live here and understand what their needs are, and try to kind of work with them. And that's what we're hearing from these guys. I was raised by these two, and you look on the wall back there, and there's this great photograph that Bob Krieger took right here of Carol Whitmire standing on the courthouse steps with shotguns and cowboy hats, and maybe that's what those guys wanted back in the late 50s, early 60s, but it's certainly not the way we tend to look at our community now. My name's Anthony Todaro.
Put yourself down for 2.5 hours all the time. Good job.
Anyway, it's a great concept, and I'm really proud to be able to say that it's a success for me, and it feels really good to wear this uniform and stand in front of all you guys here tonight, and just be proud of where we came from. As
Hey, Anthony, you think you could walk a beat in Detroit like Kinsley's alluding to?
I don't know that I could. I mean, I'm looking at you guys. I'm wearing Kevlar, and I've got firearms and tasers and all these tools on my belt, and the threats exist in this world. Unfortunately, we live in a world now where people go into schools and they shoot kids, and it's a terrible thing to consider. So we have to be as prepared as everybody else in this country. It's a very fine line to be able to walk, to not be paranoid and afraid of the people that you're working with, but also be prepared. And I'm lucky that this is the area that I get to do that in.
This brings up.
I want to tell that. I want to personally recount a quick story about Anthony and the sheriff's department. And the other night we were here, and it wasn't that late, but I had locked up, and we were just closing down, putting things away, having a few drinks, just the family here. And you mentioned paranoia earlier. I suffer from it badly. And the doors are locked here. I see a car come up, and then I see all these shiny lights and lapels, and it pulls right up front. And I go, oh, gee, the cops are here. And I turn off the lights, turn off the music, tell everyone, shut up, And then all of a sudden I see Anthony knocking on the door, and he's got a good friend of him he wanted to show the exhibit to. And this huge sort of sigh of relief came through it. I said, hey, turn on the music, turn on the lights, let's let Anthony in. And that's kind of the community. You know, I really respect Anthony and what he does, and I respect all these guys. And you know, I do anything for them just because I know that they would do anything for us. And so.
Yeah, I can wrap this up. Years ago, I was approached by some governmental agency to do a consultant job on rebuilding the police department in Sarajevo. And I said, look, it's simple. You go to every block, every apartment building, ask the residents who lives here that you trust. Get a list of names that the people trust, give them a badge. And that's local recruitment. Bring it. Joey and I get applications from out of state every day. People want to take their early retirement from LA or New York and pick up a second salary here. We tell them to move here, get another job for 2 years, tuning skis, waiting, bartending.
In fact, there's a man in the back in a white shirt who just said his son's graduating from Boulder, thinking about a career in law enforcement. What about the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office? I said, have him move from Boulder, come up here for 3 years, be a ski bum, learn what we're all about, come back for me, and you'll get a job. So I think that's what I would say. You know, hire local.
We got another question here. Val, hold on just 1 second. Get the microphone.
Bob, I'm very curious to hear how things began to change in 1970 with the campaign.
The campaign in 1970 was one facet of a multifaceted statement that we'd had enough. The young people here, and even the older, more intelligent people here, realized that, especially on the environment, the bulldozers were warming up in the woods everywhere. We had 1 acre zoning. If you had a 100-acre pasture, you could put 100 houses on it. And it was going to be the death of the environment. We came here for a plethora of reasons, but they all come down to quality of life. Clean water, clean air, no overcrowding. Hunter was surrounded with people who wanted to fight to protect the environment. His particular interest was in protecting the citizens from an aggressive policy by the police and the court system. That led to the election, the slow but steady election of several progressive candidates. If you get elected to sheriff, you got the world by the balls. You don't answer to anybody. You don't have to get 2 more votes to get a majority of 3 votes. You can change the policy, and in those days, everyone served at the pleasure of the sheriff. Dick Keenest inherited an apartment of rednecks, largely from Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had all come here and worked for the previous sheriff, Carol Whitmire. When he got sworn in, he didn't fire them. He basically let them know, if you aren't mellow, if you aren't compassionate, if you don't really care about people's feelings and take care of the downtrodden, you won't fit in here. At the same time, he hired me and a whole bunch of guys like me. And we didn't know a thing. We didn't know anything. We were trained poorly. We were thrown out in the street. It's amazing we didn't have more tragedies. But within a couple of years, every one of the Las Cruces guys and girls had left, and it was all of a sudden Dick Dove and his deputies of love. And 60 Minutes, and the war on drugs, we were conscientious objectors in the war on drugs. In the eyes of the DEA, in the eyes of the federal. In the eyes of the federal agencies, if you're not tough on drugs, you're in with the drug dealers. Keenest, I, and Joey were subjected to ongoing, grinding investigations. There's a thing I wrote in the afterword about being at Hunter's house with a famous criminal defense attorney from Denver, learning that if you had done cocaine in the last 7 years, you were guilty of a federal felony. And we were all going, what the fuck? You got a question?
Well, I was gonna mention a few quotes. For people not familiar with Dick Keenest, Hunter, when he ran for sheriff, at the end of the campaign, it started out sort of a joke, but it gained so much momentum, and they registered 739 long hairs. And so originally what became a joke steamrolled into something very serious. And Hunter was scared, shitless, that he almost was going to be elected. But his plan was to hire Dick Keenest as his undersheriff. So Hunter was going to take his salary, give it to Dick, and let Dick run the show, because Dick was in law enforcement, and he was a philosopher, and he had a lot of really interesting ideas about law enforcement. And I'm going to just read a few quotes that were on his Benton posters, as well as a quote from a poster that he made, and just to talk about him, because what happened is, although Hunter lost the election, 6 years later, Carol Whitmire resigned, and there was an election, and Dick Keenest became sheriff. And then he hired Bob, and then Bob hired Joey. And so I'm just going to read a couple of the quotes to give you an idea. One is by Cecil Labach. It is, "Trust is a social good to be protected just as much as the air we breathe or the water we drink." And he had a policy of not hiring undercover agents because he thought that undercover agents betrayed the trust of the community. And then I'm going to read one other quote. "Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step towards obtaining it." And that's Thoreau. And these are Benton posters, and these are in the book. And Bob was gracious enough to write sort of the legacy part of the book. And the end of the book is really a colorful, beautiful testament to the legacy that these gentlemen helped create after Hunter's election. Although he didn't win, we have him to thank for starting that movement.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, undercover work. I don't know how the room feels about it, but I got a feeling this community never stood for undercover work because it was a betrayal of the trust that Hunter was just talking about. But I'm not sure it's not gathering momentum again in other communities. I'm just curious. Topic
let's
for
take another question.
questions.
Is there another question out there?
Here.
Back, way in the back, she's got her hand up. She's got to stand up.
Yeah, you got to stand up.
I'm standing up. Hi, my name is Leslie Desmond, and I was here during the campaign, but I was a school teacher, and Hunter didn't want to have too much to do with school teachers back then. We were kind of, not. I met him twice, but he wasn't my pal. Let's put it that way. Anyway, I've got a question about a little bit of history and sort of an inside question that I never knew, and it seemed to me from being a resident that he was running for sheriff really for policy. He didn't want to be the sheriff, but he wanted to get forth the new policies and get Whitmire out. And so in that sense, he wasn't a, quote, serious candidate. However, he was a serious candidate because that policy stuff was really important. So my question is, when he started, how serious, however you want to define that, was he? And when he thought he was going to win, and that's the other piece, that was pretty well known, that he was scared shitless.
Yeah, DJ is going to do a little research in the book. It'll take him a second, but Hunter would have had a hard time showing up for work 2 days in a row.
Yeah, and
before there's a great documentary, a BBC documentary on this campaign. And when I first watched it, I was right in the middle of running, so I had no idea what running for office felt like. And when I saw Hunter start it, I wouldn't say on a lark because that would be disrespectful, but not expecting to win. And at the end, the closer it got, I think he thought this might happen. And his disappointment, I think you could really see on his face in this film. And I started to realize, I guess he really did give a shit at the end, because I think he was close enough to be disappointed. So I'm sorry, DJ,
no, you're
go
great.
ahead.
Yeah, and one of the quotes that I was going to read, one of the cool things about the book is, in the book we've reproduced articles that were written about the campaign. And so this was written in the Washington Post. And the article, "Hippies May Elect a Sheriff," is the title of it. And I'm just going to read the first paragraph because I think it's kind of poignant. It relates to your question. It says, Aspen, Colorado. He was a little shaky, Hunter Thompson admitted. He had just tripped all night on mescaline and now stood in Mill Street, ever-present beer can in his hand, sun hat covering his bald head, contemplating with a sense of disbelief the coming ordeal. It was really horrible, he said, referring to the long night. I thought I was going to have a little time to be crazy, but all I could think about was this fucking race. He paused, focusing on his sockless, sneakered feet. Then he said, I'm afraid the humor's gone out of it already. There's no more humor. This was Saturday. Registration had closed the day before, and it was becoming evident from the number of people, mostly long-haired hippie types who had registered as unaffiliated, that Hunter Thompson could be elected sheriff. This sent a wave of nervousness through the Aspen establishment and a spasm of horror through Hunter Thompson. Christ, now I've got to get serious, he groaned.
And we have voter registration forms here tonight if any of you are.
Yeah, if anybody is not registered to vote, we have the registration forms and a stamped envelope that is really easy to fill out. So if you're not
Freak
registered
power.
to vote here, we have the forms and we have the envelope, and you can take it with you, fill it out here, register to vote, because that was what Hunter was trying to do. You know, get the freaks and the hippies enfranchised, you know, give them the right, you know, and the county clerk didn't want to accept all these, you know, new applications, you know, in a teardrop trailer on Hunter Court, you know.
General
They
delivery.
say, what is this address? You know, let's get this out of here.
But it is a two-step process. You got to register, and then you got to vote in November. So don't forget, it's a two-step process.
Okay, let's go right here, Val. Or here you go, right here. Good.
Possession. So I'm Terry Murray, and I sit on the Liquor Control Commission, and we also oversee both the recreational and medicinal marijuana laws. And I have a question. This seems to be working quite well as far as I'm able to determine. However, we have people who come in town to visit, and they're very anxious to buy marijuana and to consume it. And they don't really have a home to go to in which to do that. So I'm curious, Joe, what do you see happening that the police department, the sheriff's department would feel comfortable with about these visitors? Obviously, if you live here, you can take it home, no problem. But does that pose a problem to you, or do you see that as something that just somehow works itself out with hotel rooms or whatever?
Well, you know, Terry, it's kind of funny that when we were talking before about frivolous arrests and the reasons for them and what's the real ulterior motive behind them, when it comes to using marijuana, it's like in 1980. Bill, when did the gondola go? 1986. Okay, 1985. It would have been like having a gondola here, where we all knew you could have a gondola and there was no snowboarding on Aspen Mountain. It would have been like selling somebody a snowboard and saying, go up there and use it, and you just clipped the guy for $400, knowing you couldn't use it on Aspen Mountain. The way I feel about this marijuana issue in Pitkin County is we're coming here, we're doing as much to educate people on the product that we humanly can. We're bombarding this place with information. We have an amnesty box at the airport. You know, if you forget your weed, you could throw it in there before you get home. But you know, the way I relate it to a snowboard is right now we're selling people a product that they can't use. And then they go out on the street about it, to use it, and a cop might arrest them for it. Kind of a contradiction. So I really think we do have to look at some kind of cannabis clubs, some place where people could use this and not get hung up by local police. We're selling them a product. They're going out on the street using it. Some not. I mean, the Aspen Police Department has a real tolerant policy about marijuana. But just like when I was a cop, we had a real tolerant I worked for the Aspen Police Department for my first few years in my career before Bob came along. And if you were peeing in an alley, we would walk by. But you know what? If you're peeing on the doorstep of Little Annie's, you got a problem. You're making me do my job. So, and I think that's the way the Aspen Police Department looks at it. They do their best to turn their head. But you know, Terry, as you on the liquor board, you could help with this. I think we got to give people a place to use this, whether it's a cannabis club or a whatever. But that's my 2 cents. But I hope, does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Thank you. What do you feel, Terry? What do you feel about it? Should we have them or not?
Every time you make a move like this, and we're still in the experimental stage here, don't think that this is, we're still working with this. I think every time you make a move, there are 100 things you consider, and there are 100 things you're not going to be able to think about. And we are overseen by the liquor authorities who also oversee marijuana in Denver. So we might start to make some moves. We might think about opening it up for discussion just to loosen them up and see what happens. But it's not a simple process. And I have to say, I'm great for simple process myself, but sitting on that board, I have seen why we take our time with things, why we're careful. I will tell you this, the first people who came in for the medical licenses look a hell of a lot different from the money guys who are walking in there now. So you can bet your bottom dollar that these things are going to open up more and more and more across this nation and probably.
Terry, you alluded to something that's much bigger. We were talking about revolutions a little while ago. An awful lot of revolutions that started out, let's say, on a noble path were corrupted, usually by the lead revolutionaries who had ulterior motives. And you're right, everything has to be thought out. You try to cover all the negative eventualities, and you never do. I do believe Colorado has done it well. In the microscope of the whole country's watching us, I think it's been going along real well. And Joey's right, and you're right, that you get off the plane, you go to the weed store, your hotel has a $300 fine for smoking. The cops don't want you smoking in Wagner Park. And 40 years ago, there was more, I saw more public weed consumption 40 years ago than I do now. And we had 30 dispensaries then, and they gave you credit and they delivered. So,
To your work environment, to your workplace.
are we going backward?
Got another question here.
This lady's had her hand up for a while.
Val, let's get over here real quick if you don't mind. Thank you.
I'm hesitant to speak out, but I have attended more funerals of kids. My son is 30 than I have weddings. And I grew up in this town from 1945 and watched so many families that the Irish disease of alcoholism, I have now 5 friends that all kill themselves on alcohol. I think there's another side to it, and that's the tragedy of going to Will Schaefer's funeral, going to Bob Stardory's kid, who said, we've both been to more funerals than we have weddings. And it's tragic. Drugs aren't everything this group cracks them up to be.
Hey, I agree with you that as chemicals go, alcohol and nicotine are the biggest killers in our society. But you can't outlaw them. You can't hand your kids to the cops and say, keep him pure. It is a medical issue. Law enforcement has had no effect on it, right?
And marijuana is not alcohol.
No, I'm talking chemicals. Alcohol and nicotine kill more Americans than all the illicit drugs put together.
Can we get Jerry here to ask a question?
You know, in response, and this is one of my neighbors, and I love her. But you know something? We're putting these kids that we use the criminal justice system as a social mechanism to control their activities. We're putting them in prison. It's costing us 50 to 60 grand a year per bed. We could be sending the fuckers to Harvard. And I'm just suggesting that there's a better use of our resources than imprisoning these kids. And these guys are the two most enlightened law enforcement people I've ever run into.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on that. One of the interesting things when I was doing the research for the book is Dick Keenest wanted to build a new jail. And it got voted down, right? A couple times, twice. And then he got sort of fed up on it. And then he sort of sloughed it off on Bob, who was a deputy. And he said, Bob, why don't you work on the jail? And over time, I think the jail could be considered one of the most humanitarian, state-of-the-art, futuristic jail of all jails around. And I know there's a lot of, but I just want to mention that.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about our jail just for a second. First of all, we get a lot of shit about my jail. Bob did too. When we go out on the road, everyone gives you a lot of shit when you're at a convention or you're from Pitkin County and you get a lot of shit about your jail, how cushy it is. Well, you know what? Our jail is not cushy, but it is humane. It is built to replicate the community. We get most people in there for sentences that are less than 90 days. Or 6-month sentences. We don't want to disconnect them that much from society. So we try and make it as much as normal as possible. Yes, I have yoga in my jail. Yes, I have AA in my jail. Yes, I have Christian fellowship in my jail. Yes, I have a regular nurse that checks in with people regularly. Yes, we have a barber come in so inmates don't cut their own hair. I mean, it is as much inside as it's like outside. Because these people are going to get out in 90 or 120 days or whatever, and we don't want them to be already institutionalized. Not that it could happen that quickly, but that's what our jail is about. It's a humane place for people. And
until that jail was built, we put humans in a tiger cage. It was built in the basement of the jail in 1896. It was a cube of steel. It had 5 beds and a toilet. I had 17 men in that jail one day back in the 80s. And we lost 2 bond issues for a new jail. Our biggest opponents was the Aspen Valley Improvement Association, a bunch of Starwood Red Mountain conservatives that didn't think money should be spent on inmates, didn't think that the commercial core of a world-class resort was where the jail should be. They thought it should be in Basalt. They killed 2 elections, and when Dick gave up, I said, let me try this. So I formed a committee, and I co-opted the opposition. It was a New Left methodology. I met with them every week for a year. I convinced them we needed a jail. We needed a small jail and a jail for $3 million. 21 of them signed a resolution supporting that. We went to the voters and it passed. And we built a new jail in the early 80s. Now it's probably obsolete. It's probably fallen apart.
I gotta tell you, not that it's obsolete, but it could use some improvements. But it's still, believe me, it's more humane than any other facility I've seen in the state of Colorado, and I've been in and out a few.
It's more humane and less secure. Sorry.
I personally thought that this construction project going on in front was sort of this elaborate ruse to like El Chapo going underneath, right? So they got all these cranes and dirt and tunnel and stuff. I was like, is somebody tunneling?
Well, what am
the Pitkin County jail?
Ray, do we have anybody who's planning an escape that we don't know about?
Anybody have any other questions here? Should we go with the tall guy?
Yeah.
Hey, Val, go in the back. Here, go, wait.
Big smoking when they rented out every room. I wasn't here for that. I was down the islands for winter. I just want to know, I mean, are the cops going to be vigilant about if somebody fires up at the pool? Are we going to change our view on that? Is
Anybody thought about
Well,
that?
I'm not the Aspen police chief or the city manager or the mayor, so those are questions for him.
Let's get
And
another question. Anyone else?
Mladen,
Over
get
here,
Mladen.
Mladen, right here. Over Easy, best place in town
Yeah.
for a breakfast. Over Easy. Hold on, wait up. We'll get you the mic. We'll get you the mic.
By the way, that's no lie. I love this breakfast.
Tropical sunset.
So, not being the born Aspenite or living here for a long time, but knowing you for such a long time. Oh, sorry. Not being living in Aspen for such a long time, being like a fairly fresh Aspenite, but really liking Hunter S. Thompson stories and Fear in Las Vegas, whatever. But knowing you gentlemen, I'm wondering what is the thing you actually took from Hunter S. Thompson's in your early years meeting him, and then a few years later, what exactly did you give our current sheriff, the ideas and social justice, and you get it.
All right. I read everything Hunter wrote in the Rolling Stone. I liked it. I agreed with it. I'm a rational neurotic. If it makes sense, do it. He was talking about issues that we were reading about and nodding our heads. The war on drugs, we lost it the day we declared war. Sorry. Some of us saw that, some of us didn't. Throughout my tenure as sheriff, until Hunter killed himself 10 years ago, he was sort of a guide star. I often make decisions based on my own experience and my own opinions. Every now and then you're confronted with a real thorny issue. You don't know which way to go. Hunter was a guy that would give me honest feedback. And if I ignored him, he'd threaten to kill me. So, and he never criticized much of what I did. And for 20 years, as I was a sheriff, Joey worked for me. And Joey had to investigate several of Hunter's
discretions.
He calls them discretions. I told Hunter he can't do the crazy shit he does. And he said, hey, I don't do it unless I can write about it and get paid. I said, I can be your sheriff, I can be your friend, I can't be both. So when he screwed up, Joey would investigate it. Joey got to know Hunter real well, and I think we both loved him as a person. He asked a lot of us, but he gave a lot in return. And Hunter is running through Dick Keenest's DNA, his philosophical DNA, my DNA, and Joey's DNA. So as a newcomer, Mladen, Hunter Thompson in 1970 said a lot of stuff I believe you would have agreed with.
Thank you.
Mladen, as far as that goes for me, Hunter never spoke a word to me that I would agree with as far as law enforcement goes. We didn't have those kind of conversations, but through his readings and some of the things, especially on these walls, that's a lot of the stuff at my core that I agree with. That frankly, I didn't know a lot of this was stuff that came from him. And on another note, for all the weirdness about Hunter, I'll tell you what, the man to me was never anything but a perfect Southern gentleman. He treated my wife with respect and dignity at all times. So I think I saw a different side. Maybe it was because of who we were or our positions.
You saw the side that we all saw. He is a gentleman. He was a gentleman.
He was a gentleman. He could also be an asshole and a dick and a pain in the ass. And we both make bad decisions in our friendships.
Hey, life
Jerry's
is a
living
series
proof.
of linked recoveries from bad decisions.
Bob, following up on that, would you speak a little bit about the relationship between Deputy Glidden and Hunter?
You have a right to remain silent.
He's the attorney.
In 1994, we were fighting the proposition to bring 737s into the Aspen airport. They would have resulted in what we call cruise ship tourism. There would have been a 737 on final approach, another one circling, another one on the way, all day, all night. and the mercantile interests supported it, the ski company supported it. The opposition started in Woody Creek, where all the planes go over as they leave and come in, and it spread. Hunter and I were doing appearance after appearance. After 6 nights of me driving Hunter to all these rallies, I needed a night off, and I said, "You're on your own." Well, that night he was going home down Cemetery Lane when Officer Glidden was hidden in the bushes, pulled Hunter over with probable cause, and the fight began. Hunter alleged that Glidden's father, Luke Short, always hated his guts, and that Glidden wanted to get Hunter as a trophy for his dad, and Hunter called Jerry Goldstein to defend him. And Jerry called me one day and said, "Hey, Bob, I told you I'd never ask you to do this, but could you testify on behalf of Hunter at a preliminary hearing?" And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Hey, I just wanted to ask you one question." I said, "What is it?" I want to ask you if you ever known Hunter S. Thompson to lie." And I said, "Hey, Jerry, I could make that statement, but then if the district attorney on cross-examination says, 'Sheriff Braudis, have you ever known Hunter S. Thompson to exaggerate?'" And Jerry goes, "Yeah, it was a bad idea." And hung up.
In the book, we talk about that campaign to bring the 737s in, and Tom Benton, who made countless iconic posters that are in the book, he made a poster called "There Is Some Shit We Won't Eat," and that was the 737s flying over Woody Creek every day. And I'll just briefly just say that Tom Benton is what brought me into this whole picture. I wanted to write a book about him, and one of Tom Benton's best friends, Michael Cleverly, who is in here today sitting in this chair, he knew Tom really well, better than I did. I was a newbie. And I said, "Hey, will you help me maybe write a book about him? Or, you wrote these really great words about him." And he threatened to kill me. And I was scared. Since then, we've become friends, and he's a great guy, great artist too. But I went to the sheriff's office to say, "Hey, I'm scared shitless. This guy wants to kill me. Is he legit?" And that's how I met Bob. And Bob said, "Hey, you're the 4th person he's trying to kill in the last month. Just don't go around him, relax." And since then, I've actually become a huge fan of his art. And,
do you love the one with the sword, the lady with the sword?
I love the one with the sword.
I love the one with the lady.
And one of the goals here with the gallery is, over time, we're going to do a series of shows and exhibits and talks, and we're going to switch it up. For the next month or so, we're going to be promoting the new book, which can be found at freakpower.com. And we're going to have this exhibit of 100 pieces of original material from the campaign on exhibit for the next month or so. But then after that, we're going to switch it up and have iconic artists, young contemporary artists, really talented artists like Ajax over here, and Tony Prykel. Tony Prykel, is he here? Yeah.
Where's Tony?
Tony, raise your hand. So over the next handful of months, we're going to do blockbuster shows, young emerging artists. We're going to try to make use of the space. We're going to do lots of more events like this with talks. And you can find all that info on the Gonzo Gallery Facebook page. We post the events. And I'll go ahead and plug it now. Next Thursday night, Robert Egger from the DC Central Kitchen and now the LA Central Kitchen, he served over 30 million meals to homeless people. And he's helped thousands of people get jobs in the food industry, and he's really a radical promoter of change for the good. And he's going to be here Thursday night giving a talk at 8 p.m. About the LA Central Kitchen and ways that you can make a difference around here. And then Friday night, we have the pleasure of Mr. Jerry Goldstein with Lauren Jenkins Friday night, and they're going to talk about the 60s. And then Saturday night, a real treat is David Heiser, who took all these amazing photographs of Hunter. He's going to talk about that experience. Bob Krieger, who's also back here, if he's free, he might join us as well. He took a lot of the photos. And then Joe Edwards, who sort of started this freak power movement. And that'll be next Saturday night. So we're going to do Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then over the next few months and weeks, we're going to keep that up and try to keep this place active and engaging.
Thank you.
I think that's going to do it, right?
And if someone wants to buy books and have
Yeah,
them
and
personalized.
I'll just tell a couple other things real quick. The new book, it's 216 pages. There's 180 images. Bob wrote the forward and the afterword. It's a beautiful account of this whole event.
And Ajax edited if you find any
stand
typos.
Stand up. No, she's very talented. The book wouldn't have been possible without Ajax. She really made it the way it is, and Bob made it the way it is also. And so we have copies of the book. What you can do is if you want a copy, you can go and buy them from these stations, and then we're going to run the line down this line. If you want Bob and Joey to sign a copy, they will, and I'll sign it. All the books I've already signed. I've already signed the books. But Bob and Joey, and you can also get them online at freakpower.com if you don't want to wait in line.
And lastly, thank you, Daniel, for doing this for us. For doing it for us. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming and being a part of this. I love you all.